and that in that person's eyes, the most valuable thing in the world is that culture, whether it's from here, from there, from there. So we've got to move from what we perceive as our self-interest. And everyone fights. You know, you look at the Middle East, everyone's fighting over perceived self-interest. They're dying over self-interest. Right now, of course, at this particular time we're doing the interview, we've got the controversy over the cartoons, the Muslim cartoons.
Right.
And that has made an awful lot of eruption, emotional, psychological eruptions, because people feel their self-interest as Muslims is challenged by this Western society's interpretation of a cartoon. There's no concept of satire. There's no concept of freedom of speech. So what you've got is to change people's fundamental identities as people. Once you change it as people, then you can begin to change how they perceive the culture. So we work on the individual.
Well, I guess you do have people who are predisposed to change because they have decided to live there. So in that sense, perhaps they're not representative.
Well,
totally.
they are. Yeah, I know your point is very well taken to the extent that they are self-selected.
Right.
But we represent not just the 380. We represent every international student in the region. We had a conference of international student leaders where international students and people and Americans come to International House for a full day with speakers, with intercultural communication, with politics, with what the future workplace is going to look like, with what's the future for certain segments of society. And we work on training them for leadership. And our whole mantra is global leadership, because in today's world, because we all use our brains today, the difference between an average worker and a good worker is 100%. In the day of the factories, 50 years ago, when people were on factory lines, the difference between an average worker and a great worker was 10 to 15%. So leadership in today's computer technology is becoming the key ingredient to bring about change in our society. So part of what we do is really try to do it. Now, how do we change it? We look upon it as a process. That you can't say you're right or you're wrong. The hardest job for me, who's used to having opinions, as you can tell, is to be in a discussion with 5 people from International House and be Socratic, to not challenge, but to constantly question them, to bring out more of what their feelings and their perspectives are. And in doing that, we tend to get people thinking about why they think a certain thing.
Now, it sounds like you have experience as a mediator, or I'd almost say as a psychologist, and yet, surprisingly, your background is in finance. Is that correct?
Well, my background is in finance, but I'm married to a psychologist.
Oh, well, that helps.
I think some of it rubs.
Some of it has rubbed off.
I think a good deal of it rubs off.
But is it odd in a way that you come from that background and you're in this position? Was that a conscious choice on the part of, I guess, what is it, the executive committee or whatever it was that was behind your
I think
hire?
I am in finance, but I was in international finance. So I did a good deal of work dealing with a lot of international people. And what I think they were looking for was someone with a business background who had some sensitivity. What I wasn't prepared for was how intelligent the residents are. I wasn't prepared for everything that I talked about. They not only knew in finance, but they knew the next generation. They were only 21 years old.
Yeah.
So what they need to be successful is how to work in a team.
Yeah.
How to be a leader, how to be a follower, how to express yourself, how to make a presentation, how to have passion for what you believe in, and how to evaluate your feelings when you're in a team so that you can listen and help the team move forward. And that's sort of what we're trying to bring. But I do want to get a very important point, Paul, and that is we never think of international students as an economic driver. International students are the sixth largest export economy in the state of Pennsylvania. International students bring over $900 million to the state of Pennsylvania. $500 million is brought to the region of Philadelphia. And these are students who pay cash. The average American student has a student loan, and the university gets 80% of it because they're discounted. But the average international student pays cash to the university.
So they're a very important part of the economy.
They're a very important part of the economy of the region and what they bring to the table. Our challenge is to begin to integrate international students more into the social fabric of universities. And when you go to universities, you'll see the international students in one section, the American students over here, and what you don't see as much as one should is this cross-pollination that we need to have to make universities the vibrant, global institutions that they have to be in this century. So part of what we do is go out to universities and work with people on integrating international students into the body fabric, into the social fabric of the university.
Okay, so that's...
So we're more than just, the 380 and our programs that bring people to international. We're beginning to move more into universities to work with them to integrate their international
Okay,
students.
so this is the academic facet. Now, in terms of the global business facet, which is, I guess, another facet of what you do and is connected to what you did before, talk a little bit about globalization, multinational corporate. And normally when we think about globalization, I wouldn't say normally, but often we think in negative terms, that this involves an imperialistic aspect and so forth. Tell me about your positive take on globalization and international business.
Well, first, I'm always happy to see thousands of people show up and protest any of the G8 meetings that we have. I think that globalization has to have its critics, because if we're not careful, the corporations will begin to run everything without any intermediaries. And we need people who are going to challenge things like genetically modified foods, which is a big issue, who are going to challenge a lot of what's happening here. Globalization, the positive side of globalization is the educated people will have formed a global class. And these are people that speak 2 and 3 different languages. These are people that work for not just corporations, but international organizations. International House is an international organization. Universities, Drexel University is a global institution. When the president of China came to Drexel University 12, 14, 15 years ago, the first time the president of China came to America, he came to Philadelphia with 20 cars. He came to Drexel, and he went upstairs and sat down in the office of this elderly Chinese professor who taught his son, who went to Drexel University.
Yes, I remember that. I was
there. The president of
there.
China's son graduated from Drexel, and the president came here to pay his respects to the professor and to the university. Who would have thought it? Drexel is a global university. It may not, it's saying it's truly a global university. But globalization is a term that says, with all of the technology, with the ability to communicate instantaneously, that everyone is now in the same room. You could be sitting there with a monitor, and you could be in Timbuktu right now, talking to me. I could be sitting here, you could be a monitor, and we would have a conversation, just like we're sitting in this gorgeous room that we're in here at Drexel. So globalization is the shrinkage of intellectual capital. People can talk to each other, create things. Now, the world is not flat, as Thomas Friedman said in his latest book, but the world is spiked. People that are involved in globalizations are going to be the ones that are going to be highly successful, but most of the world is still living on less than $1 a day. And the challenge for all the brilliant minds that globalization is bringing about is how do we address extreme poverty on the planet? And the residents at International House are aware of it. The American students aren't that aware of it, but the international students are keenly aware of the disparities that exist as a result of globalization. So that's the challenge for us.
So we're thinking about a global think tank here that can solve some of these. Yeah.
And you have to solve these problems. And I believe that all the India, Africa, Bolivia, I believe that over time, these problems are going to get solved, and people will also maintain their culture. Because the issue with globalization is it a separate culture? Once you learn how to speak English and Spanish and Quichua and get a degree in IT at Drexel and go back to La Paz, Bolivia, are you fundamentally different now, or are you going back to a culture which will change as cultures do, but will you still be fundamentally whatever Bolivian means? That's the question a lot of the international students are wrestling.
Well, they must be constantly wrestling that fine line between assimilating to this culture and keeping their identity. And I think we all struggle with that all the time.
We do, actually.
Yeah.
Americans do.
Yeah, and I think you struggle with it on lots of levels, even from the level of your own family and your own self.
That's
true. I wonder if, since we are nearing the end of this interview, if you could talk a little bit about your vision for the future for the International House and for the programs that you see developing, and the image of Philadelphia abroad. That was something I had wanted to ask you about as it filters through the International House.
Well, as you know, your president, Papadakis, went to Korea and Japan in October, along with a few other universities. I did not go on that trip. But the most important thing they learned was that our challenge is to make Philadelphia a world-class image in the minds of these societies. They know Boston, they know New York, they know Washington. So the challenge for us is to let them understand Philadelphia is a major cultural city. It's a major intellectual asset here. It's a major academic hub. So that's really the big challenge for us, is to get our message out that we're good. International House will celebrate 100 years in 2010.
2010, okay, I'll keep that in mind.
And all of our focus is on bringing every alumni of any international house in the world that can get to Philadelphia will get here. And we will have all the directors of the international houses. You're already here, so you'll be a part of it.
I can't wait.
And in 2010, we want to talk about where does the International House movement go in the next century.
Okay.
So that really is what our focus is.
Well, that's very exciting. I'm looking forward to taking part in that. Thank you very much.
You're an alumnus, you know that.
I know. It's something I'm very proud of.
Totally, that's wonderful.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Oliver Franklin.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel interview.